It's time to join Montana's very own and your voice for agriculture, Talkin' Ag Lane Nordland, for today's LaneCast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the LaneCast Ag Podcast in conjunction with the Western Ag Network. I'm Lane Northland, and today we are going to be talking about two topics, and one includes a new law in the state of South Dakota, which is aimed at imposing limitations on the ownership of agriculture land by foreign entities and nations in the state of South Dakota. But before we get to that story with South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, we are going to share information on how you can help the farmers and ranchers and communities impacted by the catastrophic wildfires that are impacting the Panhandle of Texas and Oklahoma. Again, we are seeing millions of acres burned, the largest wildfire in the state of Texas's history. It truly is just heartbreaking to see the loss that so many have shared on social media. So we are actually being joined today by Special Ranger Jay Foster with the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. And Ranger Foster, obviously our hearts are with all the ranchers, landowners, and just citizens of both the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle region there. What for our viewers and listeners here in Western Ag Network country, what is the devastation right now with loss of life, maybe just the impact? How many acres have burned up at this point there in the Panhandle?
You know, we've lost a couple of lives to it. Cattle-wise, we don't know the numbers yet. It's just too early to tell. And with the fire, the first thing we're going to have to do is get the fire under control to get the ranchers back on their property and to let them kind of see the devastation. We're well over 1 million acres and growing in the fire. It's not necessarily one. There's been, I think we're up to about 5 separate fires, but there's 1 or 2 that are a lot larger than the other fires.
Now, the Smokehouse Creek fire is the largest of these multiple fires, and it was reported by A&M just on Sunday that as of yesterday, about 15% of that was contained. I guess from your perspective with the association and the law enforcement arm, what does it look like on the ground? I know we've seen a lot of images on social media and on the primetime news, but from your perspective in that region, what is it like to take all this in?
You know, a lot of that country is sandy country, and since the fire, the vegetation's gone. It's just got a black appearance to it, and it looks a lot like the desert, just with a little black to it. And a problem a lot of the ranchers are having is now getting across the country just because it's so sandy and so soft.
Now, when we look at this, you know, it was just such a coincidence up here in north central Montana, where I call home. At the same time that these fires kicked off, the wind was blowing 60, 80 miles an hour up here. It was 60 degrees. It went from about 20 degrees, 6 degrees, and today we're about 12 below. But I literally was thinking, man, we could have wildfires kick off. And then unfortunately, that region of the nation impacted by fires right when I was thinking about that. But how fast have these fires moved once they got kicked off, just depending on that region?
You know, the Texas Panhandle's known for the wind, especially in the spring, and we've had some unseasonably warm weather. We've actually been in the 80s this last week, and this weekend, when the fire started, we kind of had the same thing, had some high winds, and I mean, just the fire goes. And we were trying to get it a little under control, and then this weekend we dealt with winds again. Fires came up, and we had a couple of towns we had to evacuate this weekend, but they have both been able to return. So, but the wind and the Texas Panhandle kind of go hand in hand in the spring together, so it's definitely tough for the firefighters.
Now, Ranger Foster, we all know in agriculture, specifically the livestock industry, we're dependent on weather. We pray for rain, we pray for good prices, and there's just so many different factors that come in, those black swan events that come in and just rock us, and natural disaster being one of those where Mother Nature truly is our best friend or can be our worst enemy. I guess from perspective of my listeners here in Western Ag Network country, what are the needs of producers down in the Panhandle here this summer or winter, excuse me, and spring?
We're just starting the spring calving season here in the Texas Panhandle, which is probably when most of the producers calve. So that's kind of added another element to it, where these ranchers have been waiting a year to get a calf crop on the ground, and they're starting to hit. And then we have the fires. So a lot of these guys have lost everything and will be dependent on feeding hay from now till we get some grass back. And we have seen a tremendous amount of support from people all over the United States sending semi-loads of hay. There's going to be a need for fencing material. Probably going to need some additional protein supplement besides the hay, especially with cows calving and the nutritional needs of them. So, needs are high, but man, the response has been great from the people.
And as I mentioned on social media, we are seeing the images of livestock that have perished in these fires. But as you and I were chatting before we jumped onto this this recording, was obviously we're going to see more loss in the livestock end of things, just as a result of burns, smoke inhalation. So it's really hard to put a figure on how many cattle have been lost. But is there a current guess out there right now between working with the association and the Department of Agriculture and A&M?
We've working with them. We've tried to reach out to our members in the area, and just everything we get from them, it's just too early to tell. When the fire was coming, we knew it. There was a lot of people who were going down the roads, just cutting the fences to where livestock could get out. So a lot of the livestock that we do have is now trying to determine where they're supposed to be and get them back home. And it's just, until the fire is under control and these ranchers can get back on their property and do a good evaluation and see the cattle that got off their property and able to collect them back, to really have a good number of death loss. But we do believe that there is going to be significant cattle lost in this fire.
And is the Panhandle one of the larger areas for cattle production in Texas? I was reading a release by Agriculture Commissioner Miller that a large percentage of the state's cattle resided there. Is that correct?
That's correct. We always say there's more cattle in the Texas Panhandle than people, but with that being said, a lot of the numbers come from feedlots in the Panhandle. So it's a little deceptive in exactly how many cattle would be out on pasture.
And again, from your perspective on the law enforcement end and the work that the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association does for their livestock producing members there, they are organizing efforts for donations, cash, supplies, and they can all folks watching or listening to this, they can actually make a donation by just visiting the website. Is that correct?
Yes, tscra.org. There on the website, some links to go to. The Texas AgriLife kind of responsible for the avenues of the feed coming in. They inventory it in. They know who's getting it, making sure it's going to people who need it. The Texas Department of Agriculture, and one other group I'm forgetting there. I think you mentioned them. But the AgriLife's huge as far as scheduling deliveries of feed and stuff like that.
And of course, as he mentioned, tscra.org, that's a great way where you can make cash donations, and those will be going to the right people. And I know you're in law enforcement too, but don't just click on a link out there, friends. If you're seeing GoFundMe's or just websites that are raising money for those impacted by these wildland fires, because when disaster strikes, scammers come out of the woodwork. So make sure and go through a valid fundraising source like the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, because Jay, unfortunately, that happens about right now, and folks start scamming people out of money trying to help others out.
Well, that is true, and that's the reason we're encouraging people to go through our website and the links as far as the donation centers and the Texas AgriLife to make sure that one, it goes where it needs to go. Two, we want to make sure they're doing weather projections to make sure where they store the feed is not going to be in the path of the fire if it was to change direction. So they're doing, some wind indicators and different things to try to keep the donations safe. And then we want to have an account of it, know where it came from and where it's going. So I think it's a little bit, sometimes can be slow, but you can schedule deliveries, and there are 3 donation centers, and man, we welcome anybody's willing to donate.
And from your perspective on the law enforcement end of things, what has it been like, though? Is there a special designation now just for folks to be able to move cattle, try to get them out of there? Because even when these fires are put out, it's going to be still quite a mess trying to track down or get cattle back to their original owners. Is that going to be an issue? What is that like from your end on the law enforcement?
If the producer hasn't branded their cattle or ear tags or both with contact information, it is definitely going to be challenging for us in the days coming to determine where the cattle go. But we will be doing that and trying to stay on top of it and see that the cattle get back to the owners.
In my last area, of course, I always tip my hat to the men and women that are out there fighting these wildfires, volunteer or professional, whatever it may be. What has that been like out there, seeing people come in and help fight these fires and try to help these communities get back?
You bet, man. It's been just, man, does your heart good to see the country come together and to support the farmers and ranchers of the community, and they're sending firefighters in from all over the country. You see the trucks going through, and it gives the guys who have been here fighting it some relief, some downtime to rest and get refocused before they're back out there. And there's, like I said, going to be still a lot of challenging days ahead before the fire's under control.
Well, there's challenges ahead for sure, and we're going to feel those challenges for quite some time. And but it's times like these where our rural communities come together, whether they're literally right down the road or maybe a few states away. This is a great way for farmers and ranchers and those that partake in the Western way of life to help out your fellow producers in need. Visit tscra.org /disaster relief to make those donations. And again, Special Ranger Jay Foster joining us here today. Jay, any last thoughts you would just like to share? Because I know you have a busy day there, and I don't want to hold you up too much longer, but just any last thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners here today?
Man, we appreciate everyone's support. It is encouraging to see the country come together and set aside our differences in a time when the country's so divided on issues, to come together as one. And just goes to show, as a country united as one, what we can still do. Man, we appreciate any donations, and if you're not able to send any type donations or financial donations, just ask that you keep the ranchers and the people of the Panhandle in your thoughts and prayers in the coming days.
Well, again, friends, make sure and make those donations. Again, tscra.org is a great way where you can help out your fellow producers and folks down there in Oklahoma and Texas get through these the devastation of what is wildfire. But again, thank you so much to Special Ranger Jay Foster for joining us here today.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And again, thank you so much to Special Ranger Jay Foster for joining us here today. And again, for our viewers and listeners, make sure and visit the tscra.org and find their disaster relief information where you can make monetary donations and also maybe help with some hay or fencing equipment for those fellow producers impacted by the catastrophic wildfires that are still blazing there in Texas and Oklahoma. Well, don't go too far, friends. We are going to continue the LaneCast Ag Podcast today, learning more about a new South Dakota law signed into law this week by South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, dealing with foreign land ownership there in the state of South Dakota. We'll be right back.
Ready for a real PRF partner?
He was willing to track us for a year and provide that data back to us for a year. That's a guy making a pretty big investment.
At Ag Risk Advisors, this isn't our first rodeo. We are one of the most experienced in pasture rangeland forage. Honesty, commitment, trust. Many companies use these words. At Ag Risk Advisors, we earn them.
Well, as we return back to the LaneCast Ag Podcast here today, Governor Kristi Noem on Monday enacted House Bill 1231. Now, this was a measure that is aimed at imposing limitations on the ownership of agricultural land in the state of South Dakota. The law is designed to prevent 6 foreign governments and entities associated with them from acquiring valuable agricultural land in the state. I just wanted to share with you the comments that South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem made at the bill signing.
Today we are signing into law House Bill 1231. It is a bill that would ensure that we have evil countries who hate America not purchasing our farmland in the state of South Dakota. It's a bill we've worked on for 2 years. This year I think we have fantastic agreement, not just with those in our ag community, but also our business community and our neighborhoods that recognize that we need to protect our interests here in this state and make sure that we are protecting our national security interests. You've heard me speak several times about the importance of Ellsworth Air Force Base, how important it is to our nation's security that we are going to be the home of the B-21s, which will be the next generation bomber that will protect this country for the next 50 years. And it's important that we know who the neighbors are there, because China is aggressively purchasing up land and purchasing up properties close to our strategic national areas that will house our greatest weapons, and we're going to ensure that in South Dakota that never happens. Also for me, this is the 30th year that I have worked on ag policy. So I know I look much younger than I am, but for 30 years I've been working on ag policy, and I have watched over those 30 years China come into our country. Every day our federal government overspends and we borrow money. We sell our treasury bonds and we sell them to China just to operate our federal government. I've watched them purchase our fertilizer companies. They have purchased our chemical companies. They have purchased our genetics and stolen our IP. They manipulate their currency. Their goal is to dominate the world, and the way they do that is by taking out America. Now we have seen in recent years them increase their purchases of farmland in this country by over 5,300%. So they are a real threat to America. And here in South Dakota, because we recognize how strategically we are placed, the importance that we have in the weapon systems that will protect this country far into the future, that we're taking that seriously and signing a bill like this into law.
Now, as I mentioned, this law will prohibit ownership of South Dakota agricultural land by 6 designated foreign governments, which includes China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela, and affiliated entities. It will also strengthen enforcement mechanisms and require more comprehensive reporting and close loopholes in existing statutes regarding foreign ownership, addressing previous shortcomings in regulating domestic company, corporations, LLCs, trusts, and similar entities with foreign ownership. Now, just in the last several months, this is the third state to pass some form of a foreign ownership legislation dealing with countries just like this that are at odds with the United States. Most recently, the state of Missouri enacted a law, signed into law, that prohibited nations like China from acquiring agricultural land near military bases. And similarly, Arkansas enacted a foreign ownership land, and actually is pushing the company Syngenta to divest their land holdings in the state as well under certain titles of that law. So again, I think we're going to continue to see more discussions in state legislatures around foreign ownership of agricultural land or land that is near military installations in the short term, no doubt. If you would like to read more about this legislation that came out of South Dakota this week, you can visit westernagnetwork.com or maybe click the links here in the podcast. And of course, make sure and subscribe and share the LaneCast Ag Podcast on your social media devices or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure and click subscribe as well. With that, friends, we are going to call it a day here on the LaneCast Ag Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, play your part and help those fellow producers down in Texas and Oklahoma that are still battling wildfire here today. You can visit the Texas and Southwestern cattle raisers online. I'll have the links in the description of the podcast as well. Well, friends, that will do it for today's conversation here in the LaneCast Ag Podcast. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the LaneCast with Talkin' Ag, Lane Nordlund. For more on Lane, check out his Facebook page, Lane Nordlund Ag Broadcaster, and NordlundCommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the LaneCast on your Apple or Android devices. We look forward to joining you next time on the LaneCast.